So we're just really excited to truly say we're moving forward in this journey together from birth to grade 12. And I know we've been waiting so long to have conversations that were truly inclusive and really have that solid conversation of bridge to practice about how the brain learns to read. And that's applicable to all of us and all of our roles and responsibilities. So we are really excited to be with you today. You're going to get to meet some of our team members, make some really strong connections to all of our areas of work. So we are scheduled to go from about 9:30 to noon today, but to be totally transparent, we're likely not going to be that long. We're really just going to, again, set the foundation for what this network is going to be going forward. Make sure that we're all on the same page as we move forward in this work together. So we're going to go ahead and dive in and get started. Maybe. All right, so Amanda has been putting in the chat for us if you've already seen it. If not, please go ahead and sign in just so we have a good idea of who's here. And then you're going to go ahead and select a community of practice for our breakout discussions today. Moving forward, what we would like to do is kind of reserve this 9:30 to 10 o'clock time for some pre-work. It's going to be kind of a universally designed, differentiated resource type of exploration time, so we can all log on to the meeting together, and we will have some things that you can work through. It might be a video that you watch, it might be some articles to read, that type of setup. We all know how busy we are and how difficult it is to kind of take care of those things ahead of time. So we wanted to build in that time for the meeting. Sometimes instead of feeling like we're talking at, it's really good that we just have that opportunity to explore and to really make sure we are giving you resources that align where you're at in your journey in the science of reading. So Amanda has, again, continued to put that in the chat, but it is on this slide. So for today, just know that, again, we're not going to take that full 9:30 to 10 o'clock time, but we wanted to let you know that that's what that is going to look like going forward. Okay. All right, and so as you will see, we're kind of allowing you to self-identify. So when we get together later in the morning, room 1 is going to be just moving towards the science of reading. You're in the exploration phase. Maybe you've heard about it, maybe you've started down the path, but you're saying, you know what, we feel like we just want to say right now we're moving that direction. If you join room 2, that's going to be conversation with other people who are really actively engaged in the science of reading process right now, and you feel like you're taking active steps forward. Again, that's that key word. In room 3, we're going to bring you together with people. If you applied for the Each Child Reads grant, you have some things in common and are going to be working through an activity together. And in room 4, that will be our CLSD partners, who actually span from birth to grade 12. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that as the morning goes on. But we really appreciate you filling out that form ahead of time, and that allows us to get those breakout rooms set up as seamlessly as possible. All right, so before we get too far in, I would like to take a moment to introduce your regional literacy support team for Region 9. We're just going to kind of go through and introduce ourselves. If you don't know me and I haven't yet met you, my name is Jen Griffing. I'm the Regional Early Literacy Specialist for State Support Team 9, and I now have the opportunity to serve actually birth through grade 5 and get to collaborate with all of these wonderful people that are on the call with us today. So I would like to next introduce Amanda.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Amanda Nickerson. I am the K-12 literacy consultant at the Stark County Educational Service Center. I work a lot with lead teacher groups and help support the instructional coaching network. And I'm really excited about an additional opportunity to collaborate with all of you.
I'm pretty sure I'm up next. My name's Debbie Hartwig, and I'm the Urban Literacy Support Specialist for State Support Team 9, working with Canton City Schools. And I cover literacy from technically pre-K up to grade 12. And next up is my colleague, Leanne Wegman.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Leanne Wigman, and I'm one of the consultants at SST9. My work primarily centers around early learning, which is that birth to grade 3 piece, and special education. And so that's the lens that I take on this team in terms of literacy. I'm glad you're all here today.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Mara, and I'm from the Tri-County Educational Service Center, and I'm a consultant here. Our focus has been the science of reading for the last 5 years. We were the recipient of a consortium Striving Readers grant, and then a few of our districts have the Comprehensive Literacy Grant, and several of our districts have applied for the Early Literacy Grant as well. So I'm glad to be here and glad to see you all. My colleague Beth would be up next. She's on a field trip with her son who's in kindergarten. So she took today to do that with him, which we feel is important. I hope they don't get rained out. So after Beth would be Dana.
Good morning, everybody. Dana Weber. I am at the ESC and SST9, and I am the multilingual learner consultant. So our English language learners. And I provide support to all of our districts, as well as I have a consortium of districts that I support regarding English learners, which literacy touches all of their lives. And so the lens I bring is, how does this apply to our English learners when there's language transfer? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jo Krajak, and my area is adolescent literacy, and I have a special fondness in my heart for those future 11th and 12th graders that are soon to graduate and where their literacy skills are. And I'm glad to be here and introducing then Andrew, who is next.
I'll speak for Andrew. He must not be on this morning. He's our gifted and talented consultant here at our Tri-County ESC. And he plans to be on the call, but I think he was delayed this morning. So again, he's been very heavily in the science of reading, and we have really benefited from everything we've learned so far. And that would bring us to Lori.
I believe Lori had some overlapping responsibilities today, so she's going to be jumping on and off, but she is our SST9 Associate Director. So that takes us to Janelle.
Good morning. I'm Janelle Schuler. I'm the Curriculum Director at the Stark County ESC, and am honored to be part of this team and excited about the collaboration between SST9 and the ESC, as well as all of you that are on the call. So I'm excited for the information that they're going to share today and hope everyone has a wonderful meeting. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. One quick reminder before we move forward, if you could please fill out the Community of Practice breakout room form. Matt's working really hard. Matt Mays is another valuable member of our team. He's working really hard in the background to make sure that we can have a seamless transition. So we really appreciate you selecting that Community of Practice ahead of time for us. So we hope that we're modeling for you by all the pictures you see and all the lenses that you see on this slide, really how important it is to invite representative voices to the table. So is it challenging at times to have a large team? Yes, absolutely. We get that. But you should see as we move forward this morning with the components of Ohio's plan, just how the roles on our team should really represent different student characteristics, ages and stages, knowledge and experiences, and decision-making abilities. So we encourage you to consider as we move through the morning whose strengths, roles, and responsibilities really best align to ensure that your core district literacy support team does the same. All right, so linked here on this slide, you're going to see what could potentially honestly be your first action step just a few minutes into the meeting. So Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement really does guide us in using literacy acquisition and achievement as a lever for sustainable school improvement. So Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement aligns and builds on the state's current literacy-related policies and practices and promotes evidence-based language and literacy instruction and intervention. To achieve this alignment, the state is really working to coordinate and link efforts through the following strands of action. So these strands we're going to talk about in depth, and they include shared leadership, multi-tiered system of supports, educator capacity, family partnerships, and community collaboration. So I realize right now, I just want to say up front that this might not be new for all of us. However, it's really important to consider whether all of your stakeholders are aware of this plan. And as we move into this next section, you may want to start to brainstorm some connections to your one plan or to other current areas of focus in your district based on your district data that you can leverage to either introduce or to provide some greater access to the content of the plan using the context of Ohio's theories of action. All right, so we're going to dive into shared leadership. And if you've done any of the literacy breakout sessions with us in the past through SST9's shared leadership networks, where we were talking about the Ohio improvement process, we went down the road of contextualizing that through the lens of literacy. So we did some literacy breakout sessions together. And now you'll see we're almost taking a reciprocal approach because we are putting so much emphasis on literacy and really know how much it impacts our school improvement efforts. We're going to really take literacy as that bigger piece of the puzzle and then dive down each of these individual theories of action to see how they really can create some synergy and work together to help improve our student outcomes. So again, I'm going to say up front, these slides are kind of wordy, and I'm very aware of that, but I think it's really important that we know as leaders that we have all the same language that we're using, that it's really clear and consistent, and that as a leadership team, I'm saying both at the regional level and at the district level, that we know that everyone is on the same page as far as the language we're using. So that's why we're taking some time to go in depth, and we know that this is going to form a really strong foundation for our work going forward, these shared understandings. Okay, so we know that strong leadership, as leaders in this room, we know strong leadership gives vision, energy, and direction to our literacy improvement efforts. And shared leadership means the responsibility for leading and supporting the successful implementation of evidence-based strategies really belongs to district leaders, building administrators, coaches, and educators. And sharing leadership is really critical to implementing evidence-based instruction and intervention. We hope you see that represented on our call as our network grows. We have coaches as a part of our network now. We're inviting administrators. Everybody who really has that instructional leadership responsibility is invited to be a part of this network. We know it's important that you provide and protect the space for the work to happen in your day-to-day life, and it takes a lot of people to make that happen. So what this means, again, in practice, is that all of our educators are involved in identifying the challenges, thinking about the causes of underperformance, the solutions to be implemented, and really taking ownership of those shared leadership tasks that support our improvement approaches. So this is accomplished through structures such as our leadership teams, so our district leadership teams, building leadership teams, teacher-based teams, as described in the Ohio improvement process. And we know when done well that these teams really share accountability for data-driven strategic planning, implementation, feedback, and plan adjustment. So Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement really does strive to address shared leadership through training and coaching on evidence-based language and literacy practices and systems to support literacy improvement. We hope that you're going to see evidence of this in our support at the county and the regional level as well through the shared leadership systems and structures that we're really working to develop between the SST and our ESC partners. Next, we have another really wordy slide, but the second theory of action we want to talk about is multi-tiered system of supports, which we all, have been anticipating for a while, right? The state coming out with, a more defined definition around this. But we really know the significance of this and how it not only supports our students, but our educators. So truly, again, language from Ohio's plan says that the multi-tiered system of support structure provides a framework for supporting learners based on their unique needs. It can guide staff in designing effective instruction and appropriate interventions as part of school improvement efforts, which is really important. This is a really significant part of that. A multi-tiered system of supports for reading includes full access to grade level instruction for all learners that is differentiated and designed to meet the needs of all learners in Tier 1 and designed to be targeted, that additional intervention at Tier 2, and then thinking about intensive intervention at Tier 3 for our learners who are experiencing difficulties. The purpose of the 3-tier model of instruction is to provide effective core instruction and address reading difficulties as quickly as possible. So we're going to take just a minute to look at that triangle, that image, and kind of consider it for a moment as a mental image of a pyramid that's being built, like an ancient type pyramid that's in process. So just as we're building the language and literacy knowledge of not only our students, but our educators, we would never think about building a pyramid without a solid foundation. So if you think back to images that you've seen, there'd be ramps and there's scaffolds in place to support that construction. And if a weak spot was found, most likely not everybody would be continuing to build. They would stop right away and they would take action somehow. They would either rebuild, repair, or restructure so as not to risk the safety of the structure. And they would be honoring and preserving what they'd already invested while ensuring that they really don't sacrifice their plans and designs for the future. So with that kind of mental image in mind, consider that under this model, each tier adds a level of intensity designed to accelerate the learner's rate of learning and avoid learners requiring intervention for multiple years. As a learner responds positively to the instruction, that intensity is gradually faded. And the movement within the tiers of instruction is fluid and data-based, and the tiers represent instructions and supports, not categories of students. So such a system really does include a continuum of evidence-based system-wide practices to address academic and behavioral needs. And it also calls for frequent data-based monitoring to inform instructional decision-making to empower each learner to achieve high standards. A multi-tiered system of supports can be used at local, regional, and state levels to address the varied and often complex needs of our learners. So we're going to examine another version of this graphic later that's going to really kind of help communicate the function of this model a little bit more clearly. So next we have educator capacity, and I think this is the one that we are all most familiar with and probably comfortable with in our leadership roles. But aligned to the science of reading, educators and quality instruction are the most fundamental components of student acquisition of literacy skills and knowledge. So professional development and technical assistance that's tied to evidence-based language and literacy development and instructional practices are key to building the capacity of teachers to maximize impact. So Ohio is building educator capacity through embedded, sustained professional development and coaching that really does focus, again, on evidence-based language and literacy practices and interventions. So Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement emphasizes the need for professional learning and for resources that deepen educators' understanding of how children learn to read, diagnose why some children struggle with learning to read, and to sharpen educators' abilities to implement reading instruction and intervention that's aligned to the science of reading and is culturally responsive. Okay, the next theory of action is near and dear to my heart if you've worked closely with me before, but it's family partnerships. So we know that family partnerships are essential to supporting learner progress and achievement in language and literacy development. And Ohio's work focuses on the importance of building these partnerships in early childhood and kindergarten through grade 12 educational settings. Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement, again, emphasizes how state, regional, and local educational entities can develop goals and strategies for supporting families in their critical roles in children's literacy development. So when you think a little more about the skills of phonological awareness, letter recognition, phonemic awareness, and then language, vocabulary comprehension, and even motivation, coupled with just the connection to reading materials in everyday life, we know that all these things begin to develop at birth. And even I say prenatal. We know that that's definitely, we're getting more research around that every day, and it's really exciting. But we know that families and caregivers really play an important role in building these foundations. So school strategies for partnering with families must also support those adult behaviors that we know directly support the language and literacy skill development of children. So by communicating with families, offering resources and guidance for literacy development at home, and really developing strategic family partnerships, schools can create holistic and sustainable support systems for learners from birth through graduation. And finally, we have community collaboration. So everyone in the community can contribute to children's literacy development. Community partners that are interested in the healthy development of children are essential, such as libraries, after-school programs, cultural institutions, healthcare providers, businesses, philanthropy, and the faith-based community. But there must be a shared understanding and a mutual reinforcement of efforts in their approach to developing children's reading skills. So again, the state, we continue to say this, it's a team effort. State, regional, and local level partnerships really help drive literacy improvement, and they keep in focus why proficient literacy skills are critical. These partnerships include networks that share successes and challenges, provide opportunities to problem solve, and time to consult with each other to strengthen local literacy plans and community improvement efforts. All right, so up next, you will see a graphic that I kind of put together to try to bring all these things together in my head, because I think we look at sometimes an Ohio plan and then we look at what our day-to-day looks like. And in my mind, sometimes I need a visual to support what I'm thinking. So here is just an outline of what our regional literacy supports look like currently in our efforts to support you as districts and to really support walking out what Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement really looks like. So you'll see our little state of Ohio there, and then you see the layered arrows kind of pointing to where Region 9 is. So you will see that this network really does exist as a universal support for district and building teams who've been trusted to lead language and literacy growth that's aligned to Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement. And I want to emphasize for all students and all adults, because we know how critical the adult learning piece is to this. So we want to keep that at the forefront of our minds in your district, in your building, in your grade level, and in your communities. So in collaboration with our partners at the Stark County and the Tri-County Educational Service Centers, we're going to strive to equip and empower all stakeholders in their role in providing high-quality opportunities to develop language and literacy skills for children, birth through grade 12. I get excited every time I say that. Rooted in Ohio's theories of action. So at the bottom, you'll see those 5 theories of action that I just covered. And then you'll see kind of just a little abbreviated version that kind of talks about what our supports are going to look like. So you'll see under universal support, you'll see, SL for shared leadership, MTSS, EC for educator capacity, FP for family partnerships, and CC for community collaboration. So within our regional literacy network is that accessible universal support for everybody. We're going to cover all of those things, okay? Up next, you will see another level of universal support, which is that educator capacity piece. Those are our professional learning opportunities. And we have a variety of those things that are currently offered and that are coming that really we can extend, again, across to all stakeholders. So I think it's really exciting that we're not only looking across the continuum of birth to grade 12, but we're looking at all adults who impact all students. So we're talking about really providing support to families and caregivers, to community partners, to our paraprofessionals, to our after-school programs. Again, all adults that impact all children. So next you'll see another layer that's communities of practice, and that's a little bit more targeted and a little bit more data-driven. It's going to be determined again by what your data says, but where you are in your journey. So today, your communities of practice, we kind of gave you an idea of some shared things that you have in common. Again, where you are in your journey, if you've applied for a grant, if you're already a sub-grantee, because we know that that'll bring some common conversation for you. And truly, that's what communities of practice are. It might be that you have peer coaches, that you don't have a designated instructional coaching role in your district, and you really want to strengthen peer coaching through your shared leadership structures. That could be a community of practice. Family engagement and community collaboration. You might have a family engagement goal on your one plan, but really are looking for ways to make that actionable and walk that out and align that with the literacy work that you're doing in your district. So we may form some communities of practices around things like that. And then finally, again, another targeted data-driven support is problems of practice. And that's another kind of lower level layer, the next layer down on our umbrella. Your problem of practice might be, especially I know this is hitting our birth to K entry friends really hard right now, is just teacher turnover. So we might have a problem of practice where we just get together and say, we're going to have lunch together once a month, and we need to talk about how we can work together as a system to kind of work through some of these barriers together and problem solve. And then we'll take that back to the larger group and share out what we're learning together. It might be that we have a few districts that need to do a curriculum audit or getting ready to do a curriculum adoption, and you just really kind of want to work through that together, and some things that you're coming up against that you want to navigate. And you don't necessarily want to or need to do that alone. It might be scheduling. If you are in a high school and you are really just wanting to think outside the box and say, we just do not have that time for dedicated intervention and that really intensive support that our students need. We would love to get a few districts together, put our heads together, and just kind of come around a table and say, how can we reimagine how this can work? And really work with, work with the assets that we have and the strengths that we have and see what we can come up with, because we know as we put our heads together, we can be really powerful. So those are kind of the layers, again, from that regional network perspective, again, to communities of practice that are sharing some common things that they're working through. And again, those kind of problems of practice of just, there's this one thing, if we could work to get past, it would really, really make a big difference for our students and our educators. So again, that's just a little graphic to kind of pull all these pieces together as we get started in our work together this year. All right, another layer of support we have for you is the newly developed SST9 Regional Literacy Supports website, and it is in progress and being built right now, but it is linked there at the top. And as you can see, with everything we've talked about this morning, this is really all about all of us knowing what it takes to develop skilled readers and providing some universal, inclusive access for all of the adults that impact all of our students. So as this network grows, we'll be sure to share and filter resources and supports for you here on our SST9 Regional Literacy Supports website. And currently, if you go there, you can find information on our literacy networks, as well as the professional learning opportunities we provide. And so we're also going to be reciprocally linking to our ESC partners because we really want to make sure as a team that we're providing access to support at both the systems and the instructional level. All right. So I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you. I apologize. This goes against everything in my teacher gut that I feel like I'm talking at you so much, but we know that there are times that direct instruction is really important. And as we lay the foundations for this network, we think it's really important that we're all on the same page and speaking the same language. So thank you for bearing with me. So again, now that we've set the stage a bit, I'm going to share some content that was pulled together from some of our partner offices at ODE. So please keep in mind that we're considering all learners across the continuum of development. So the data that's shared on this slide is from the recently released document, Each Child Means Each Child, Ohio's Plan to Improve Learning Experiences and Outcomes for Students with Disabilities. So I'm sure, if we're being honest, none of us find this really surprising. But I think at times data like this can cause us to jump right to our strategic and intensive services for students rather than considering the quality of and accessibility to Tier 1 and our responsibility to ensure that we have high quality instruction taking place in our classrooms. So as we talk about this from the system perspective, remember that each child means each child isn't just about each child, but about each adult who has the opportunity to impact each child. So I want you to think again about Ohio's theories of action, and they're going to help keep us rooted in this idea. And when implemented well, we know that those theories are going to provide an opportunity to really maximize our efforts towards high quality language and literacy environments for all students, educators, families, and communities. So again, knowing that we're striving to use literacy and language acquisition as an achievement, or I'm sorry, as a lever for sustainable school improvement, and then specifically what we do know now about how the brain learns to read, we know that we have the opportunity to make an even greater impact on our students' learning. So I think as we process again through this next section, I think we want to think about how have we already made those steps, or how do we get started in making some of those shifts as you consider this. So that's going to lead us to the next part of our conversation around structured literacy and why our understanding of these components are so critical for all of our students. So I'm going to turn it over to my friend Debbie Hartwig.
Thank you, Jen. So why should we pay attention to structured literacy? I just want to start out by giving a brief reference to the component of structured literacy instruction. There's 3 components. This instruction is explicit. That means the skills are directly modeled and practiced. And this instruction is systemic, meaning that there's consistent instructional routines that are used to guide students and to guide them towards those correct responses and correct practice. And then this instruction is also sequential. The skills are taught in an order, usually from easiest to hardest, and there is a sequence within a grade level and across grade bands. This approach is specifically called out in Ohio's dyslexia support laws, and you're going to be hearing a lot more about that as we head into the wintertime meetings, our meetings that are going to be, I think the next one is in February, when we will have more information about this law. But structured literacy is called out specifically in this law. It is in the Ohio Dyslexia Committee Guidebook. It's said that it must use a structured literacy approach as it's published. Educators will be required to receive professional development in this approach. Kindergarten reading and writing standards are going to be revised to incorporate this approach, and assessments are going to be identified that use this approach. Instruction is going to be aligned, and the certification processes will all be developed around this structured literacy approach. So Jen, if we can head to the next slide. So presently, structured literacy is not a typical practice in most Ohio classrooms. And this was actually one of the catalysts for writing our state literacy plan. We wanted to send the message out there that we needed to start looking in this direction, and we needed to start seeing this in classrooms. So most educators have not been even introduced to structured literacy practices in teacher preparation programs, not even sometimes in their reading endorsement programs, and even graduate level work in literacy has not always reflected this structured literacy work. So practices that are not components of structured literacy instruction, but common in our classroom, might be something like emphasizing letter names instead of their sounds, and the absence of both phonological and phonemic awareness from Tier 1 instruction. Phonics, decoding, and spelling, they might be addressed in word study, but they're not explicitly and systematically taught. You might see the use of leveled and predictable text that are not controlled for the decoding difficulty. And error responses when students are reading out loud. You might see students guided to focus on the picture cues or the content and guess the unknown words rather than use a consistent application of decoding skills. So back to our original question. Why should we pay attention to structured literacy? Next slide. Thank you. The reason is because all learners benefit from structured literacy practices. And for most of our students, it is absolutely essential for them to have this structured literacy to create that path to reading fluency. What you see on the screen is Nancy Young's infographic called The Ladder of Reading, and this helps illustrate this. Nancy Young is a member of the International Dyslexia Association. She has a Master's of Education in Special Education with a focus specifically on dyslexia. She has extensive experience and knowledge in teaching evidence-based approaches in reading, spelling, and writing to parents, to teachers, and to students. The concept of the ladder of reading emerged during Young's lectures with teachers and parents who believed the myth that structured literacy was only beneficial and necessary for struggling readers. To counter that misunderstanding, she created this infographic featuring the categories and percentages that illustrate the ratio of individuals who require an explicit, sequential, systematic, and phonics-based approach to learning to read, compared to the small proportion of individuals who learn to read effortlessly. There is a link on the International Dyslexia Association website that lists all of the research that Nancy Young used to create the ladder of reading. Let's go to the next slide and let's get a better look. So as you look, I'm hoping you can see this a little bit clearer, but as you look, about 5% of our general population seems to learn to read effortlessly. And about 35% of us learn to read, that process is relatively easy. And then 40 to 50% of us will not learn to read without us, without the teacher. They need that code-based, explicit, systematic, and sequential instruction in order to become proficient readers. And then there's 10 to 15% of us that need that code-based, explicit, systematic, sequential, and diagnostic instruction, but also need many repetitions, lots and lots of practice. So I'm going to ask you right now to reflect for a moment on how you learn to read. Where are you on the ladder of reading? Was reading easy for you? Or did you need that great first grade teacher to help you get there? So we're going to try a waterfall chat. So that means we're going to type something into the chat, but we are not going to send it right away. We are all going to press send at the same time. So I'm going to ask you to please type a color, green, orange, or red, for where you remember you were on the ladder when you first learned to read. But again, don't send your chat off until we tell you to. Let's do that all together. So take a minute and type in your response. Where were you when you were learning to read? Hopefully I gave you enough time to type a color. All right, let's go. Let's send the chats. Okay, I'm not sure that we have everyone. You can still send it if you haven't sent it yet. But scroll through and look at our responses. And I would love for you to unmute and share what you notice. Can I have a volunteer share something that they've noticed looking at our responses?
They're all orange or green.
Thank you, Jennifer. So if you were in the green area of the ladder, how might that influence your approach to reading instruction? And what if we had to struggle a bit to learn to read?
I find it interesting. I was instructed back in the old days when it was like the whole language approach where none of this was even taught. And so that's just how I assumed everybody learned to read, and really breaking it down and teaching the phonics, phonemic awareness, all of those things. Like I had to learn to do that to be able to teach it because I had never been taught it.
Thank you, Lisa. You are not alone. Most of, a lot of us, this was not taught to us in our undergraduate and graduate work.
I would echo what Lisa said, and I would also say, as we've been starting this work, I personally struggle with reading, and as we have slowly waded into this water, I truly can understand why I struggled and why I still struggle. There's just a lot of pieces that personally I've been able to connect to my own reading struggles.
So Joy, are you referring to maybe a piece of the components of literacy that you didn't have when you were younger, or any?
Absolutely. I have no phonemic awareness whatsoever, and I can't spell. And now I understand why that is. So, like, that was a huge aha for me. And I just remember my parents being so frustrated with me when I was a child because they were probably both in the dark green on this ladder. And just the tears and the frustration, and I mean, spell check saved my life. But as we go through this work and we look at the why behind what we're doing and why these areas are important, I think it gives a lens of clarity to people that have struggled personally in their reading journey.
Yes, and isn't it funny, we can diagnose our own holes in our own instruction, because I'm a kindred spirit, Joy. I struggle with spelling and have my whole life and could never figure out why.
Me too. And then Joy, don't you hate it when they say, well, sound it out? And it's like, I don't know how to sound out. I wasn't taught to sound out. I don't know how to sound out words. What are you talking about?
Absolutely.
Well, I would add to the opposite of that. I'm older than dirt, and I learned to read solely by phonics and open court. And I can, figure out a word, sound it out. But then when you put it all together, that's kind of the opposite. And I had a child who learned to read with whole language. And so I could never understand with her why she couldn't sound that word out and figure it out, because that's how I learned to read.
So these are some of the great things that we're going to get to talk about in this network, and share what we're learning with each other, and then share how we're addressing these things. It could be a change in curriculum. It could be some teacher professional development. It could be, buying some decodable text. But we can all work together on those things in this network. That's why I'm very excited about the structure of this and how it's being rolled out today. I hope you can see those pathways to this growth and learning from each other. So if we want to go ahead and go to the next slide, I took this a little bit deeper and started talking about what would this look like? What would the ladder of reading look like if you had a class of 24 students? So if you had that class of 24 students, one of those students would learn to read so effortlessly that we wouldn't even know what events helped them break the code. It would almost seem as if by magic. And often they are reading before they even walk into kindergarten. And then about 8 students in the class are going to find it relatively easy to read. They may ask for help from time to time, but once they get the answers and they get directed, they make those connections very quickly, and reading is just easy for them. And then we're going to have 10 to 12 students, which is at least half of your students, who won't learn to read proficiently without your structured literacy approach to reading instruction, or you providing the curriculum for that to happen in those classrooms, or you providing the professional development to make that happen in the classroom. So looking at the whole picture of the 24 students, it's about 50 to 66% of the students in this classroom will not learn to read proficiently without structured literacy instruction. And if you think about that, how many times do we look at our data and we have about 60% below benchmark and well below benchmark, especially at the beginning of the year? Those are your kiddos that need that strong tier 1 instruction that's going to give them this nice sequential and explicit structured literacy. And then there's about 40% that will be very, very much advantaged by this approach. And those are the students that often are identified as being maybe dyslexic. And I'm really happy to turn this over now to my dear friend, Amanda Nickerson, who's going to take us deeper into structured literacy. So take it away, Amanda.
Good morning, everybody. Before we define what structured literacy is, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that while we see this term in the legislation and in the forthcoming dyslexia information, and the term may be new to some of us, this is the work that we've been engaged in for the past 4 or 5 years at deep levels throughout our region and throughout the state. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that if you've been working with the Tri-County Educational Service Center or the Stark County Educational Service Center or our partners at SST9, this has been our ongoing work, and it will continue to be. So you will probably hear some things as I'm talking that are familiar and that you'll start to pull together as this comprehensive structure. So if we ask ourselves, what is structured literacy? The most simple definition I could come up with is that it is a systematic, cumulative, explicit, and diagnostic approach to teaching phonology and phonemic awareness, which then kind of falls into sound symbol association, what we think of as basic phonics. It encompasses syllable instruction, which is advanced phonics. It also encompasses morphology, syntax, and semantics. And what we see is that the components reflect this changing emphasis across grade level bands and also can reflect specific student needs. The other thing that's important to acknowledge and recognize is that structured literacy instruction is organized to follow a logical order of the language, beginning with the easiest and most basic skills and concepts, and then progressing methodically to more difficult skills and concepts, really with each successive step based on previously learned skills and concepts. It's very cumulative. We know that as we're teaching all of these things very intentionally, that all of that content must be automatized to free working memory so that our students are able to direct their cognitive resources toward increasingly more strategic comprehension and expression. Meaning is the goal. We want them to know what they're reading and to understand content knowledge. But we also understand that there are layers of language that we have to address to do this. So in addition, structured literacy requires the deliberate teaching of critical content with continuous student-teacher interactions, and all of that is really informed by careful and continuous assessment. As Debbie mentioned, this approach not only helps students with dyslexia, but there's also substantial evidence that is efficacious for all students. So we're going to look on the next slide at what really makes this approach particularly beneficial. Again, I think it helps to think about structured literacy as a framework that reflects the layers of language. If you look at the image on the left, this really shows that language is kind of like an onion. It has multiple layers, and it can be conceptualized through concentric circles as shown here. So if we think about it this way, the core of language is composed of phonetics, those speech sounds, and phonology, phonemes. And this really undergirds everything else. So we see upon that, we are layering on morphology, that understanding of words and meaningful word parts. And this undergirds what we understand about syntax, those phrases and sentences. And then that is layered beneath semantics, the literal meaning of those phrases and sentences that we're engaging with. And then all of this is really couched within pragmatics, the meaning and context of discourse, whether that is spoken or written. And so what I really like about this model is I think it can help us critically think about language and literacy development from birth, because it is also helping us think about language from birth through grade 12. And so we're really going to use this model as a way to revisit the multiple layers that interact between oral and written language across that language and literacy continuum that you see on the right side, that we see in the state's literacy plan. And really, these models can help us think about how we can tackle common challenges. So for example, multilingual students enter US schools at different grade levels with varying oracy and literacy skills in their home language that may not necessarily align with traditional grade level expectations. And this is because of varying degrees of exposure and experience with standardized English. So thinking strategically about how we respond in light of what we know about language and literacy development can really make a big impact. Okay, next slide, please. So it may already be apparent to many of you. I'm sorry, I'm just going to acknowledge the fact that I'm at home with a sick child who is yelling for me in the background. So I'm just going to take a moment to tell her to hold on. I apologize. Cora, mommy will be right with you. I will be right there. Okay, thank you for your patience. Being a working parent with sick kids is always a challenge, especially in the middle of a pandemic. Okay, jumping back in. All right. So again, it may already be apparent that structured literacy is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's very flexible. It's not an approach that's only reserved for intervention or students with disabilities. We're really talking about a structure that should be utilized in Tier 1. It's not exhaustive. It's not an exhaustive approach to English language arts or content area reading, but it can be a really strong foundation that we build upon. And really notably, it's not just a K-5 approach, and it's not all about phonics. As we saw on the last slide, there are multiple layers that we have to be attending to. So what is emphasized at each level is nuanced, it's cumulative, and therefore structured literacy really does have practical implications for all students at all grade levels. And that's one of the things we want you to walk away with today. So I pulled a couple quotes from Louise Spear-Swerling's article, which we've linked in the very back of this document and we'll make available to you. There were just a couple really great quotes that are very salient, that really help us to think about how we use structured literacy across multiple grade levels. So she wrote that the highly explicit teaching characteristic of structured literacy is effective for students at risk in literacy for a variety of reasons, such as those from low-income backgrounds or English learners. And what we know is that research reaffirms this, and the fact that students with less exposure to standard or academic English require more repetitions and really intentional explicit teaching. And within this article, she really also asserts that structured literacy approaches are advantageous, especially for students with dyslexia. But if implemented in Tier 1 instruction and tiered interventions, structured literacy has the potential to prevent or ameliorate a very wide range of other reading difficulties. And that's really key here, that attention to not only remediation, but prevention. That's really our hope with this. Okay, and then she goes on to say in the primary grades that structured literacy practices involving phonemic awareness, phonics, spelling, and accurate oral reading of text are especially crucial to preventing literacy difficulties because these skills form an essential foundation for reading comprehension, and because most students' reading problems in these grades center on decoding. And this really gives me pause, and it prompts me to ask a couple questions, like, what are the implications? And then knowing this, how should we respond in the primary grades? What does our instruction look like? And then when we consider students with persistent phonological and decoding deficits, how do we continue to respond to those decoding needs in the secondary grades? We know that with dyslexia specifically, that phonological deficits is a core aspect of that, of dyslexia. And so these students need ongoing support in the core content areas. So these questions really have systems level and instructional level implications. All right, and then moving on, looking at kind of the upper elementary grades and middle school, she asserts that many students would be helped by explicit systematic teaching of higher levels of literacy, such as sentence structure, text structure, and discourse structure in writing and as well as in reading. So I want to note here that changing emphasis of literacy skills across grade levels, and note the attention to all learners in this excerpt that I've pulled together. Okay, so we are going to kind of couch this in a discussion about Tier 1 instruction and how we can ensure that we are looking at this through an equity-focused lens for all learners. So 3 questions that we will consider kind of broadly are our policies promoting high expectations for all learners? And then number 2, is the instruction we're promoting meeting the needs of all learners? So not only do we have high expectations, but are we actually meeting their needs? And then question number 3 asks, are all learners fully accessing core grade level instruction? Now, the third question is highlighted here because we've identified this as a really salient problem of practice for our regional literacy network to think about moving forward. And so we're going to look at this a little more closely on the next slide. So that question again is, are all learners fully accessing core grade level instruction? This really is a question of equity, because we know that high expectations and high standards alone are insufficient. And we see that in the first graphic here representing equality. If we give every kid the same thing, it is not going to be enough for every child, right? We need some differentiation. And so again, as demonstrated by that ladder of reading that Debbie was talking about, roughly 40% of our students will learn to read with broad literacy instruction. And we have 60% of students who really require something in addition to that, something else, something more supportive. So how do we ensure that they have full access to core grade level instruction? That's the big question. And as shown in the second depiction here, to ensure equitable access to grade level core instruction, some students will require more than high standards in broad instruction. Some students require high standards in great instruction, and we're talking specifically about structured literacy here, that explicit, systematic, diagnostic instruction that's focused on the multiple layers of the English language. And we know that some students require a greater intensification of instruction. So they need those high standards, they need great teaching, and they're also going to require some individual support or scaffolds. And so this is one way of really thinking about an example of a high quality differentiated Tier 1 instructional framework. Okay, so I'm going to try to go through this as painlessly as possible. There's a lot in one slide, a lot of talking notes that I've thought through. So hang with me for a moment. The first graphic is probably very, very familiar to all of you. So we've seen lots of different depictions of MTSS in 2D. I would like to kind of take a moment to reconceptualize how we think about multi-tiered systems of support, because this traditional view that we're used to seeing for RTI or MTSS is usually presented as a two-dimensional pyramid. And this helps us to understand that all students should have full access to that core grade level instruction in Tier 1. It helps us to understand that students benefit from Tier 2 services, that some of our students will fall into that group, and that we have few students that are going to require Tier 3 services. But it is a kind of flat depiction. So when we look at MTSS in 3D, we really are able to see a more robust representation of the structure, which I really appreciate. So we see that each tier is layered. If you can kind of look at the right side of the slide, we see that each tier is layered so that all students have access to differentiated core instruction. That is the foundation. And then some students require supplemental support in Tier 2. But note that the support is layered, right? It's sitting on top of that strong core instruction. And then these students are receiving differentiated instruction and supplemental support. And I also want you to pay attention to the ombre effect that's depicted here. We know that MTSS is a school-wide structure that encompasses general education. It's not exclusively a special education structure. So a flexible continuum of services exists here without rigid lines of demarcation like we see in the traditional depiction of MTSS. So again, all students are represented in Tier 1. Some students may receive Tier 2 services without a formal evaluation or a diagnosis. And of course, that's our hope, that we can prevent and mitigate reading difficulties and other learning challenges so that students can be best served by data-driven, evidence-based, differentiated core instruction. And then if given sufficient support in Tier 2, they're going to be able to transition back to exclusively receiving that differentiated Tier 1 instruction. If we have students who aren't responding to strategic interventions in Tier 2, then we're going to intensify instruction in Tier 3. And those students who receive Tier 3 services, again, may or may not have a formal label, but if data suggests a need for intensification, those students are entitled to Tier 3 services in addition to Tier 1 core instruction and potentially alongside or in place of Tier 2 support. So to sum up this slide and kind of all of my thoughts about it, what I really want you to walk away with and think about and kind of mull over is the fact that MTSS is a school-wide system of support that is inclusive and supportive of all students, including our general education students. And while it's important to refine the entire system, we have to closely examine our Tier 1 services because you've probably heard this before, we can't intervention our way out of a Tier 1 problem. And this is really where structured literacy has the potential to change outcomes for all learners. Okay, so we're gonna go back to just a quick parallel to what Debbie was saying. I just wanna wrap up my segment with a reminder here that in any general education class, we have a very small number of students who are going to learn to read without any direct instruction. For them, it seems basically effortless. And these students are advantaged by a structured literacy approach, especially within the context of a data-driven differentiated instruction in classroom. A much larger percentage of students will need explicit instruction. We've talked about that earlier, just that these students need structured literacy because they're not going to intuit it otherwise. They're not just going to absorb these patterns if they're not taught. So for these students, it's imperative. And again, we can't intervention our way out of a Tier 1 problem, but if we focus our efforts on ensuring that all learners are able to fully access core grade level instruction through the implementation of structured literacy, through scientifically based reading instruction, then we can significantly reduce the number of students who are receiving Tier 2 and 3 support. And we can ensure that the students who are not responding to evidence-based instruction are able to receive the targeted support they need in sufficiently small groups. So now that we have kind of re-examined all of this and the importance of strong Tier 1 instruction, I'm going to turn this over to Leanne and Dana, and they're going to walk us through some considerations for special populations. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Amanda. I'd like to take a moment just to talk about some considerations for our students with disabilities. In Ohio, there are more than 270,000 students ages 3 to 21 who are identified with disabilities and eligible for special education services. A student who's eligible for special education services happens when their disability significantly impacts their ability to access the general education curriculum. There are 14 categories of eligibility, and I really want to point out that except for a very, very small number, these students with disabilities are as cognitively able as their non-disabled peers. And yet what we know from our state data is their achievement rates continue to be significantly lower across the board, but also in reading. So the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, or what we refer to as IDEA, has established a series of special education indicators to measure a school district's services and results for students with disabilities. The Ohio Department of Education has worked with stakeholders to set targets for districts for each of these indicators. And then annually, each district receives a report that they call the Special Education Profile that shows whether the district is meeting the indicator targets for students with disabilities. The Special Ed Profile not only includes the district's current indicator data for that year, but also indicator data going back multiple years. The intent of the Special Ed Profile is for districts to use its indicator data, both current and trend, to analyze its outcomes for students with disabilities to inform special education services. To aid districts in this analysis, the indicators are organized by essential questions, or what I think of as considerations. These considerations include kindergarten readiness, achievement levels, preparedness for life after high school, and in general services with students with disabilities. So what you see on the slide here are those essential questions and all of the indicators that are contained in that Special Ed Profile that districts get each year. I am not going to go through every single indicator, but I do want to call out the essential questions and considerations and 2 specific indicators that relate to the topic of language literacy. So to start, the 5 essential questions that organize all these indicators are our young children with disabilities entering kindergarten ready to learn? Are our children at the K-12 level with disabilities achieving at high levels? Are our students with disabilities prepared for life and work after high school? To what extent is the district implementing special ed services and associated results for children with disabilities? And then there's a newer category with indicators that look at equity of services and supports for students with disabilities. As I mentioned, I'd like to call out 2 essential questions that contain indicators that demonstrate language and literacy outcomes for students with disabilities. The first I'd like to call out is that first essential question: are young children with disabilities entering kindergarten ready to learn? The Special Ed Profile gives district data about what preschoolers with disabilities learn and are able to do before they ever get to kindergarten. You can see in that essential question, there's 3 indicators. The one I'd like to draw your attention to is indicator 7, which they call preschool outcomes. There are actually 3 data points within this one indicator, and one does include language and literacy skills. It specifically indicates to districts the percentage of preschool students with disabilities who demonstrated improved acquisition and use of knowledge and skills specific to early language and communication and emergent literacy skills as a result of the district's provision of preschool special ed services. What we know in 2019-20 school year, Ohio reported 23,351 preschool students with disabilities. Of those, the vast majority of the students are identified in categories that indicate some sort of communication or language and literacy delay. So what we know off the bat is that there are a large number of students entering kindergarten already identified with significant disability in the area of language and literacy. In that same year, Ohio reported, and Jen referenced this early in our presentation, but I think it's important to call out one more time, that 67% of kindergarten students with disabilities were not on track in literacy. So we know that we have a vast majority of preschool students with disabilities with language and literacy delays, and we're seeing that translate to a significant portion of kindergarten students with data that shows they're not on track for literacy. So I think this data asks the question or offers an opportunity to consider what is happening before children enter kindergarten. What does the emergent literacy instruction at the preschool level look like, and how is it impacting that outcome that we're seeing in our indicator 7 data? I think there's a great opportunity to address these delays and difficulties early on, because we know the sooner that we can identify needs and address them, the easier and faster it is for students to catch up with their same age peers. The second essential question and indicator that I want to draw your attention to is in essential question 2. The question is, are children with disabilities achieving at high levels? And there is indicator 3 within that question that does include data specific to language and literacy outcomes for students with disabilities. So indicator 3 is titled Assessment, Participation, and Performance. And that indicator contains multiple sets of data. And the specific one that I want to call out is indicator 3C. This indicator measures the percentage of students with disabilities, again at the school age level, who scored at or above the proficient level on the statewide reading assessments. Our most recent data shows that on the state ELA assessment, 28.9% of students with disabilities scored proficient or better on the state ELA assessment, and that's compared to almost 65% of all students. So we do continue to see a pretty significant achievement gap between the reading proficiency rates of our students with disabilities and those without disabilities. In addition to the considerations we've talked about so far about core instruction, I think there are some additional considerations that are important to consider for students with disabilities. Yes, it's absolutely important for students with disabilities to have access to high quality core tier 1 instruction. But I think the additional layer that's so imperative to consider for these students is the evaluation and identification process for special education identification. Is it done with precision, and is it aligned to the science of reading so that we know we are with laser-like focus identifying the reading difficulties that we need to address to close the achievement gap? I think the second very important consideration specific to our students with disabilities is, once we've done that, how is the specially designed instruction prescribed to address these reading difficulties? Is it aligned to that laser-like targeted need, and is it tethered to the science of reading and monitored to the degree that it's adjusted so that, again, they're making the progress that's necessary for them to close the achievement gap? So these are just some general considerations for our students with disabilities that I wanted to share today, and I'm eager to continue this conversation around preschool students with disabilities, as well as our school-age students with disabilities, and the opportunity for them to be skilled readers and writers. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dana for additional considerations for our English learners.
Thanks, Leanne. And just as a reminder, while Leanne and I are pulling out and extracting some special considerations for 2 specific populations, I want you to keep in mind that everything that Jen was talking about, everything that Debbie was talking about, everything that Amanda was talking about, we're talking about all kids in those scenarios. And so just there are specific considerations with these two populations, but keeping in mind that when we're talking about anything with structured literacy, we're including these groups. It's inclusive. So I wanted to be clear with that. There are approximately 70,000 multilingual learners in the state of Ohio. Some of you are more familiar with the term English learner. I'm trying to gradually change over to the more asset-based language of multilingual learners. Our preschool friends here with us today may be familiar with the term dual language learners, but I feel like multilingual learners kind of encompasses all of that. So the 70,000 is in K-12, but we have many, many more in preschool that aren't in that count. Schools are required to provide language development and ensure that the students have equitable and meaningful access to the curriculum. And we must continuously evaluate the programs to ensure that the multilingual students are growing in their English language development, as well as their literacy and academic success and needs. So what I did here with this slide is I was thinking of Amanda's 3 questions to consider and looking at the questions that Leanne had in her slide, and I just changed them up basically to say multilingual learners instead of students with disabilities. The first question, though, I did adjust a little bit deeper, where instead of are the students ready for kindergarten when they enter, are the schools ready for our multilingual learners? So I want you to think about your settings that you're in and how prepared are you for pre-K through grades 12 to receive English learners or multilingual learners at varying degrees of oracy and literacy skills in their native language, and now trying to add on the English language as well. So I think it's important to look at this. What I did here is I aligned these questions with the 10 ESEA requirements that came from joint guidance from U.S. Department of Ed and Department of Justice on, which was all based on our legal obligations in schools. So I took those 10 requirements and aligned them to these essential questions that Leanne shared, which are merged with those 3 essential questions that Amanda had, just putting in and replacing multilingual learners. I want you to right now get a mental image of the multilingual learners in your buildings. And I know that every district represented here today has multilingual learners in your setting. So I want you to get a mental image of those students as I'm talking about this, because when we're talking about literacy, there's special considerations for our multilingual learners due to language transfer from their native language. So some of our students are coming pre-K through 12 with no prior exposure to the English language. So that includes our vocabulary, that includes our spelling patterns, our semantics, our syntax, all of that they may not have experience with, and that's from pre-K through 12. So I know a lot of our schools have had an influx of high school students this year with with a lot of gaps in their education and varying degrees of literacy in their native language, and now they're trying to add English language. So think about those students, because those students are going to need some of the structured literacy as well. And how do we have that built into our systems to provide those supports? So we just need to be cognizant of that and just make sure that we're thinking about these students when we're talking about our literacy plans and we're talking about the supports that we're providing. And I do want to be clear too that we really need to know a little bit about their home language usage and what that language is and how close in proximity that is to the English language. Because of these varying differences. So even if they come to us with strong literacy skills in their native language, there are different phonemes in English that do not exist. Our spelling patterns are completely different from many of the different languages. Some of our speakers come to us with different, they don't have the alphabetic system. So they have, they come from different writing systems and everything. All of these we need to give some explicit instruction to, regardless of the age that they come to us with. So they need to know how to pronounce the sounds that don't exist in their native language. Keeping in mind that when our pre-K kindergarten starts school, they've had 4, 5, 6 years to hear the language and develop knowledge of the sounds before they have to start thinking about reading and writing in that language. For our multilingual learners, they don't have that exposure. Many of them don't, some do, because there's such a diverse group. So keeping that in mind. So what I want you to think about as we go through this series and as we go deeper into this is think about those students, regardless of grade level, that they're here with us, and what are their explicit needs, and how can we build into the system time to provide those explicit supports that they need that are very unique coming from their other language. And so I just wanted to bring that to your attention, and I'm so happy that we're going to be including this population into these discussions as we need to be doing in our districts and in our buildings and in our settings as well.
I just have to say, I work with some really great people, don't I? I'm so excited that not only are we able to bring our voices to provide this support to all of you, but I think that as we go through this network, you're going to get to know us a little bit more professionally and where our strengths are. So hopefully that helps you as you reach out to coaching and, you know, you get to know not only where those passion places are, but kind of where we function best. And I think that's really exciting and good for all of us to know. And again, just affirms that team approach. You got to hear some personal things about us today too. And, you know, our families are our priorities. And I think that, again, these team approaches really allow us to step into those spaces where we can be the only one, right? We're the only ones that can be, you know, mamas and spouses. And so when you have a great team that's on the same page, it allows us to all not only function in our strengths, but function in the spaces in our personal lives that we know are the core of who we are. So we're really thankful. I think that we kind of are just getting to demonstrate that in a really authentic, organic way today, because we know it's really close to our hearts and what we do. So I'm thankful for that. So thanks for being with us today in this journey. So I just want to take a little jump again, kind of from bridge things to our practice. And so we're going to talk about the state view of things. And again, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page moving forward into the communities of practice. And really just, again, knowing the pathway that we're taking together. So many of you may have heard of the CLSD grant, and what that stands for is the Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grant, and it does span, which we're very excited about, from birth to grade 12. So the Ohio Department of Education recently, again, I'm saying recently still, just because when everything happened through the pandemic, I think our view of time got a little bit skewed. So we're gonna go with recent, and we're just gonna keep it that way. Was awarded $42 million for a comprehensive literacy state development grant from the U.S. Department of Education to build ongoing work to improve the language and literacy development of our state's children. So approximately 95% of the award is distributed directly to local districts, community schools, and early childhood education programs to improve literacy outcomes for children from birth to grade 12. So this 4-year subgrant will focus on developing model comprehensive literacy sites in early childhood education programs and district preschools, as well as elementary, middle, and high schools across the state. So the model sites are going to concentrate on implementing practices consistent with Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement. And then the grant's also going to support professional learning and coaching, which we all know our team's very passionate about that coaching piece as well. So the partnership between the model sites and the department is going to allow early childhood programs, districts, schools, and families to collaborate to improve student literacy and increase educational options available to students who have traditionally been underserved. Another new area of focus for us is the Each Child Reads grant. And this grant is going to focus on preschool, kindergarten, and first grade. And this is a 3-year grant that's going to focus on supporting programs to perform a comprehensive needs assessment of early literacy instructional practices and programs, and to address literacy again in preschool through first grade. So grantees may use funds to receive professional learning and support for teachers and principals, which I love the inclusion of that, to improve their ability to provide instruction for children with dyslexia and or at risk for further reading difficulties. And also to collaborate with the department to identify professional learning opportunities that are aligned to the science of reading. All right, so let's take it down from that state view a little bit closer to the regional view. So we are incredibly fortunate in our region that we have all 4 grade bands represented. We truly do have a cohesive birth through 12th grade, model site structure being built in our region, and that's so exciting. So just to make sure that everyone's aware who our partners are that are doing this work, I just have to say I get to be a part of a lot of state level conversations, and just have to affirm just how proud we are of the investment and how they have moved forward so gracefully during this pandemic. We know what a challenge it's been, and they have said the right thing, and we're going to continue to move forward. So we're just very thankful to be partnering with all these great sites. So in birth to kindergarten entry, our primaries award was the YWCA Early Childhood Learning Center. And we also have the JRC Learning Center and Artful Family Enrichment Center that feed into Canton. So those are our Canton sites. We also have Stuckey Family Interfaith Child Development Center that feeds into Alliance, and Oak Park Preschool in Massillon. So I love that truly this does not impact just one district, but we have children across the county that are benefiting from this birth through kindergarten entry grant. And we're so thankful that we have our literacy coach represented on the call today. And so we're thankful that everyone is truly going to be a part of the conversation and to help to create a system to really support everything we've been talking about so far this morning. Our K-5 sub-grantees are our friends from Oroville City Schools. Our 6 through 8 award winners were Alliance City Schools, and 9 to 12 are Canton City Schools. So again, we're all thankful. They are all going to be very instrumental in our network as we move forward and sharing all their learning as they move through this journey towards becoming a model site. Okay, and then finally, just an update from the regional level for the Each Child Reads grant. We're honored and excited to say that 9 of our Region 9 districts submitted an intent to apply. And the really beautiful part of the Each Child Reads grant is it's truly designed to come alongside the work that everyone's already doing. Rather than it being this new thing or a pilot or let's try this, it's like, let's really go deeper and strengthen great work that's already happening. So I think it's a little bit of a fresh perspective and approach on that. And so we're really excited for the partnerships that are going to come from that. And then again, creating this regional network that allows those really organic communities of practice to emerge from it. Let's look at our data. Who's doing the same work? How can we bring those conversations together? And again, I'm kind of dreaming of, I love the accessibility of this. I know we have great participation, but I also am kind of excited for when we can be back in rooms with big circle tables, jump in between groups. And I think that will be great too. So we will work to make sure we can include all of the great elements of professional learning that we know to meet can meet everybody's needs. So we're looking forward to that. All right, so we're going to get into our communities of practice right now. Thank you so much for filling that out ahead of time for us. That's incredibly helpful and just, kind of saves us from multiple meet links and such. But Matt has generously gotten everybody situated into breakout rooms based on what you chose. And again, just to remind you, we kind of did this way today because we knew you have some things in common already. And it's always easy. I don't know about you. I have trouble with small talk sometimes because I'm pretty deep and passionate. So we want to make sure you had something to start with that you had in common, and we're able to kind of collaborate that way. So again, we have room 1 is moving towards the science of reading. Room 2 is you're actively engaged in the science of reading. Room 3, each child reads grant applicants. And then room 4 are our CLSD partners, again, from birth to 12. And really all you're going to be working on together is just kind of doing some brainstorming. And this is just going to help you process all the information that you heard earlier, kind of combine it with where you are in your district and where you think you might want to go. So this is going to be processing for you. And it's also just going to give us some really good information on how we should focus moving forward. We strive to be data driven, and we have one plan data. We have lots of data sources, but we really want this to be more personalized. So in your room, and you will have a facilitator with you if you get stuck, but in your room, you will have a Jamboard activity. Okay, and there will be 4 actually different tabs for each room within the Jamboard. But you are going to fill out just a pretty basic table. On the one side, you'll have strengths. So strengths within your literacy work in your district right now, and opportunities for growth, again, in kind of light of what you heard this morning. So again, there are going to be 4 different tabs within that Jamboard, pretty easy. We are going to spend probably about 12 minutes brainstorming together, and then we will come back and start to identify and determine some of our next steps. So I want you to think about this. I know some of us came as a team, and I know some of us came as individuals, and we are thankful for however you are able to engage with us. Please know that, because as we move through this morning, what I want you to know is, as much as this is to build our capacity as a network for the people that are here and in the room, we tried to set this up so if there were any portions of it that you just wanted to take these slides and use them with your DLT or your BLT, or, that we had enough conversation around it that you felt equipped to do that. So if you were like, that slide would be really helpful, or that group of things, or, we really feel okay about Ohio's plan here, but want to take it a little deeper with this group, or as we write this grant, maybe just our team needs to really review these things and make sure that we're speaking, we're rooted in the same things and speaking the same language. That's part of our heart in this too. So I kind of just want you to know that as you process your next steps. So right now, you are welcome to either unmute or share in the chat. If you have a personal next step based on today, if you have a team next step based on today. So again, just some ideas might be, you might just need to say, we need to really identify who our district literacy support team is. Hearing all the information this morning, you might say, oh, we have the right people in place, but here's another person that needs to be part of the conversation. So that might be, that would be a great first step, to make sure that you have the right people around the table. You might have started thinking from the beginning, what plans do we already have in place? And so I know, there's conversation about one plans or local literacy plans, but thinking about what plans you already have in place. And the second part of that question is, who has access to those plans? Because we have lived so responsively, especially during the pandemic, but we continue to, unfortunately, in education, we build that plane as we're flying it. So sometimes it's those 1 or 2 people that become responsible for getting that plan in on time, and we never have the opportunity to take those next steps to share beyond, here's our action step, or here's our goal, or here's our strategy. So again, a next layer to that district literacy support team is, what plans do you currently have? Maybe who took the lead on those plans and who has access, because that's when you're going to truly have cohesive planning. And then your communication, again, will be rooted in the same strategies and goals. And then again, in light of the rest of our conversation, you might be thinking about, are all of your students and stakeholders truly represented in your plans and in your professional learning opportunities? So if anybody kind of would like to share any reflections or next steps, please feel free to do that. Again, you can unmute or you can put it in the chat, and we will have an opportunity for you to share that in our exit ticket as well.
Hello, this is Joe from Room 1. And one of the thoughts that I think we came to is we've noticed how many of us are going to be looking for new materials in the future years. And so maybe, Jen, we're thinking of starting a blog or maybe just a community jam board where, you know, if you're looking at a certain program, you can log in your thoughts of, you know, maybe what you've discovered and what it meets your goal, what is lacking, and then somebody else could comment on it, because, you know, we all want to know if we're looking at a certain program, who else is using it and so forth. So if maybe get Matt to help me there, we can put some kind of a blog together.
I love that. And I think that, again, you know, it's that community. I love that we call it a community of practice. It just feels friendlier. I know I get accused of living in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood sometimes. It's okay. I own it. But it's truly is a community, you know, and sometimes we live in our little isolated villages and don't realize that we could be, you know, putting our efforts together. And just even brainstorming thought partners. I know that's how our team functions of, you know, I just need a thought partner. Like, I'm really deep in this right now and I need somebody to pull me out. So Amanda and I kind of always say our back and forth is she helps pull me down from the clouds when I need it. And I kind of pull her up out of the weeds, and, you know, together we really balance each other out. So we want to create that type of community here where you kind of start to identify those people that you can rely on to help you really solidify those next steps. I love that idea. Yeah, Joy, I think that would be great.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, instead of us all individually doing the work, it might be helpful if we're all looking at knowledge building curriculums, if we have a list. And I don't even know if this can be done with everybody's schedule, but if CKLA is going to come in and we're going to look at that, I just think if you have more heads together, it makes the work a little lighter.
Yeah, and we are very open to the feedback for all that. So, you know, we're kind of testing things out as far as accessibility too. You know, what used to be those, you know, kind of after school meetings that everybody's exhausted at Thursday from 4 to 6 type of situations. You know, the benefits of being coaches or being in leadership positions and is we have a little bit more flexibility from the time end sometimes. So we have talked about, you know, literacy lunch and learns, or, you know, can we just hop on from 11 to 12 knowing we're all going to hold each other accountable for eating lunch because that's really something that happens. Sometimes we have that little discussion in our breakout room of, you know, we're all in the same boat together and sometimes we need to hold each other accountable for that. So like, hey, bring lunch. And we can set up even something more structured if we want to have a week where we talk about curriculum or assessment or, you know, local literacy plans or whatever that looks like. Just, I think communities of practice are very invitational. You know, we all come what we have to the table, but no pressure necessarily. And I think we can all use that in our lives right now. So we'll play around with some ideas. And again, if you have some, we would love to hear them as well. Julian's going to be our blog pilot. I love it. Oh, we couldn't hear you. I'm sorry. I think I see you talking, but we couldn't hear you, Joanne.
Just saying that who thought a blog and Krajak could go together? We'll see.
I love it. All right. Yeah. I love this. Feels really encouraging and supportive. And, you know, I know that we've all spent a lot of time away from other responsibilities this morning, but I think we all know it's the right work. And I think as much as I struggle with feeling the urgency of it, we have that weight to carry together. And we all have a different role to play in it to support each other. So that's very exciting. I don't want to cut anybody off. If anybody has anything else to share, we can do that. But I also want to honor our time. right, I think we'll keep moving forward. All right, we have seen, as you continue to process your next steps and all of the learning we've done together today, we also wanted to just remind you of Shanahan's Literacy Pathway. It's been used in professional learning and networks around Ohio for the past few years, and we're going to likely continue to revisit this. But right now, I think it just serves to affirm that it starts with you and it starts with all of us collectively. Along the pathway, you see evidence of the theories of action that we talked about. You'll see that equity is embedded in every stop. And again, it just starts with leadership at our state and our regional and our district literacy support teams. So we encourage you to consider where on this pathway you've been, what could be a step in your district's literacy journey, because it is a journey. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And we can serve to kind of help pace each other. You know, sometimes you need that friend that, you know, encourages you to pick up your speed, or if you have really long legs like me, I need a friend that comes beside me and says, you're gonna pass out at the next mile because you're going too fast. You know, so we all need friends like that in our lives. And again, that's part of what this network is for, is so we can learn from each other and grow together. So again, as you think about your plans and your professional learning, we encourage you to keep these journey checkpoints in mind. Consider those 5 theories of action if we truly want to raise language and literacy achievement. And I just kind of want to close us out with this. A lot of us have seen the simple view of reading and that multiplication problem, right? But this is just truly a vision for all learners. So if you think from the language and literacy perspective of the capacity of professionals, and you multiply that by all learners truly being represented as readers, so thinking about that from the equity and integration lens, the product of that would be all students can read, right? And that's based and rooted in Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement. So really, again, this graphic is something that you could use to really emphasize how all of the areas of investment that we're making, whether that's MTSS, educator capacity, solidifying our shared leadership teams, our efforts in our One Plan to really partner with families and collaborate with our community. Those things together just create synergy. And that synergy can really produce students who thrive in high quality language and literacy environments. And we have the opportunity to continue to work towards that and provide that for every child every day in our classrooms. So that takes us to the end of our time together today. Don't log off quite yet. I have a couple more things to share with you, but we would really appreciate if you complete the exit ticket. Again, as much as this is a universal support, if you go back to that image I showed you at the beginning, we do want it to be data driven. There are some things that we need to do to continue to keep our GPS set where we need to go, but we really do need that feedback. You know, we need to know when we need to stop, slow down, provide some additional layers of support. So we truly do value that feedback from you. Our upcoming regional literacy network meetings will be held. Our next one is December 16th from 9:30 to noon. We will meet again in February and again in April. So again, you can access your exit ticket through that QR code. And then for the remainder of the time together, I'm going to hold on the line, and I know the rest of our team is going to hang on the line a bit. If you have questions about the Each Child Reads grant, if you have questions about anything happening with our CLSD partners, please feel free to hold on the line. If not, another thing that you can do, and I will click back to this in a minute, is if you access the slideshow that Amanda, I believe, shared in the chat, you will see that there are some optional kind of structured literacy resources that we've added to the end of this slideshow. So in addition to what we've shown you, again, if you have a team working on something, if just for your own background knowledge, you want to dig a little deeper, we didn't want you to have to feel like you had to go out and search. So again, deeper dive into structured literacy. You might want to check out some of the resources linked on this slide. Again, not a required by any means, but just simply to provide an additional learning opportunity for those of you who might be interested. So feel free to take a look at that. I'm going to go back to the exit ticket here for anybody who needs it. But truly, on behalf of our regional literacy support team here, we're so thankful that you took time to be with us today. We know everyone's schedules are busy, and we hope that you found this time valuable and that you will truly find a network of support here. So I hope you have a wonderful day.